There are 1.4 million, actually 1.4 billion Indians on Earth, with the diaspora reaching all the round corners of our planet. Members of this diaspora reside in 46 out of 54 African countries, amounting to 12.3% of the diaspora over time. Indians have been living in Africa long before the colonization of Africa, and many of them consider themselves African, not only by citizenship, but through the generations living before them on the continent. Do you know where they are? Anyways, here are the Indians of Africa. Like, subscribe, and share please to help us. Thanks and enjoy. The largest group of Indians in Africa reside in South Africa, possibly spanning back to the 1600s. The first known group landed in the 1860s as indentured workers in Natal, meaning they were contracted laborers for 5 years. At the end of the contract, some Indians went back home. However, over 60% chose to remain in South Africa and quickly integrated into the labor force. Eventually, another set of Indian migrants known as passenger Indians arrived, and they focused on trade and moved inwards, establishing communities in the Johannesburg area. In 1917, indentured labor was abolished due to the mistreatment towards the laborers, and today there are over 1.3 million South African Indians and counting. Though they were the buffer between European settlers and the native South Africans, the Indian population were also victims of apartheid, and in the post-apartheid era, Indian South Africans are eligible for affirmative action and continue to be a productive part of the population. Though the population is much smaller in Kenya, Indians have been living in the East African country as early as the 15th century. However, more migrated in 1865, again as indentured workers, working on the Ugandan Railroad, and some decided to stay, eventually thriving more than in other African countries. There was even a point in history when the Indian population owned 3/4 of the non-agricultural land, which put them in friction with the European settlers. After Kenyan independence, Indians were given 2 years to become naturalized Kenyans, and only less than 10% did, which only furthered tensions between the native Kenyans and the Indians. Eventually, as affirmative action and permits were enforced, most of these Indians relocated to England, going down in population to 78,000. However, the population has steadily increased over the years. The Indian population today amounts to 100,000 of the total Kenyan population, with them even being recognized as a 44th tribe in 2017. If you meet an Indian in another country that mentions they are from Africa, chances are they will be from Kenya. In neighboring Tanzania, there are about 60,000 Indians, and in Uganda, the Indians make up 1% of the population, which may be a result of Idi Amin's expulsion of Indians during his reign. On the big island of Madagascar, there are over 25,000 Indians, with most of them residing in the capital. In Botswana, there are 7,000 Indians living in the country, with about half of them being citizens of the country. Zimbabwe has about 9,000, mainly from Gujarat. They found it difficult to migrate to South Africa in the 1800s, and therefore many moved to the country when it was still called Southern Rhodesia. With the complicated history of the now Zimbabwe, there were times when immigration was possible only for wives and children of Zimbabwean citizens, and there was also a time of the Land Apportionment Act of 1930, which drove many Indian Zimbabweans from rural areas to urban communities. Eventually, the population also decreased after the economical issues Zimbabwe started facing in 1999. You will hardly spot an Indian Mozambican, but the truth is Indian settlers have moved up and down the banks of Mozambique dating back to the first millennium. Following other stories of Indian migration to Southeast Africa, Indians were growing in number, coming in as craftsmen until an outbreak blamed on Indians halted the migration. Mozambique became a place many Indians relocated to when South Africa became a difficult place to settle. Today there are over 70,000 Indian Mozambicans. On the island of Mauritius, Indians arrived shortly before the abolition of slavery, also under contracts. Another wave arrived between 1834 and 1920 as indentured laborers. They now make up 70% of the population of Mauritius. This in turn makes Mauritius the only African country with Hinduism as the main religion, and they even use the Mauritian rupee. Indians are not only in the southeastern part of Africa. According to India's Ministry of External Affairs, Africans of Indian origin thin out as we move towards the west of Africa, with countries like Liberia, Niger, Benin, and Mauritania not having a single citizen of Indian origin. In North Africa, Egypt has the highest population of citizens of Indian origin, and Central Africa would have the smallest population of Indian Africans. Other areas with Indian Africans are Seychelles, with 0.3% of the population. While this video talks about Indians in Africa, there are also a group of Africans in India, the Siddis. This group were taken to India way back in the 7th century during the Arab slave trade, while some others relocated as merchants and mercenaries shortly after. These descendants of the Bantu from Ethiopia make up to about 20 to 70,000 of the Indian population, while others moved to Pakistan. With the Indian Ocean separating India and the southeast side of Africa, it is no wonder why many Indians call Africa home. This in turn has developed a strong relationship between India and the many southeastern regions of Africa. If you're an Indian African or an African Indian, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Will we see you in the next one?